Tonight, like every night, you're going to lose about a third of your life to something you can't remember happening. You'll lie down, your consciousness will switch off, and for the next 7 or 8 hours, you won't exist in any way you can describe. We treat this as normal, boring even. But what if it just stopped? What if tonight you lay down, close your eyes, and nothing happened? Your body kept moving, your mind kept running, and sleep simply never came again. It sounds like a minor inconvenience. It is not. It is one of the fastest ways to destroy a human being that we know of, and understanding why reveals something strange about what sleep actually is. Let's start with the closest thing we have to a real answer, because someone has actually tried this. In 1964, a 17-year-old named Randy Gardner decided to break the world record for staying awake as a science fair project, with 2 friends monitoring him so he couldn't cheat. He stayed awake for 11 days and 25 minutes, 264 hours total, with no drugs of any kind. A Stanford sleep researcher named William Dement heard about it partway through and rushed in to observe, half expecting to witness a medical disaster in progress. The early hours were easy. By day 2, Gardner couldn't focus his eyes properly. By day 3, he was irritable and struggling to coordinate his own body. By day 4, he was hallucinating, at one point insisting he was a famous football player, mistaking a street sign for a person. By the end, his speech was slurring, his memory had holes in it, and doctors, monitoring his brain activity, found something unsettling. Parts of his brain were showing signs of sleep, brief flickers of unconsciousness lasting only seconds, while the rest of him remained technically awake and even walking around. His brain had started rationing sleep to itself in fragments, because it had no other choice. Gardner recovered after one long sleep and seemed fine, and for decades this case was used to argue that sleep deprivation, while miserable, wasn't actually lethal. But that conclusion depended on one detail. He only pushed to 11 days. What happens if you don't stop? That answer exists too, and it comes from research most people have never heard of. In the 1980s, researchers at the University of Chicago ran an experiment on rats, using a setup called the disc over water method, designed specifically to prevent any sleep at all. Every single rat that was kept fully awake died, on average within 2 to 3 weeks, not from any single organ failing. Their bodies simply stopped being able to regulate their own temperature, their metabolism spiraled out of control, and their immune systems collapsed entirely, leaving them vulnerable to infections that a healthy rat would have shrugged off. Autopsies frequently found remarkably little specific damage. No smoking gun. It was closer to their bodies forgetting how to keep themselves alive. In humans, there's an even stranger case, a genetic condition called fatal familial insomnia. It's exceptionally rare, caused by a mutated protein that gradually destroys a part of the brain called the thalamus, which normally helps regulate sleep. Patients start with mild insomnia and, over months, lose the ability to sleep at all. What follows isn't peaceful wakefulness. Patients develop panic attacks, then hallucinations, then a state doctors describe as somewhere between dreaming and being awake, acting out their dreams while their eyes are open. Eventually, the body's basic functions, temperature control, heart rate, hormone regulation, break down entirely. It is, without exception, fatal. Usually within 1 to 2 years of the first symptoms, it remains one of the only diseases where the immediate cause of death is, essentially, the absence of sleep itself. So why does this happen? Why would skipping something as passive as sleep unravel an entire organism? For a long time, scientists assumed the brain simply shut down at night to rest, the way a machine powers off. Then, in 2012, a team led by neuroscientist Megan Nedergaard published research describing something they called the glymphatic system, a kind of internal cleaning cycle that activates almost exclusively during sleep. While you're unconscious, the spaces between your brain cells physically expand by as much as 60%, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flush through and wash out metabolic waste that builds up during the day, including a protein called beta amyloid, the same protein found clumped in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. Your brain, in other words, doesn't rest at night. It cleans itself, and it can only do this cleaning while you're asleep, because the process requires space. Your packed, active waking brain doesn't have. If that cleaning cycle never runs, waste never clears. This is likely a major reason chronic sleep deprivation is so strongly linked to cognitive decline and dementia risk later in life. You're not just tired, you're accumulating trash in the one organ that can't afford to hold onto it. Sleep is also when your body does its accounting for the immune system. Researchers have found that people who sleep less than 6 hours a night are roughly 4 times more likely to catch a common cold after controlled viral exposure than people who sleep 7 hours. or more. Certain immune cells called T cells appear to work far less effectively when sleep deprived, partly because sleep is when your body produces and releases cytokines, proteins that help fight infection and inflammation. Skip enough sleep and your body genuinely struggles to defend itself, as if the walls came down without you noticing. And this is only the physical side. Sleep deprivation dismantles the mind first, and it does so faster than most people expect. Somewhere between 24 and 48 hours without sleep, cognitive performance drops to a level comparable to legal intoxication. Studies from the 1990s and 2000s found that a person who had been awake for around 24 hours straight performed on par with someone at a blood alcohol level of roughly 0.10%, above the legal driving limit in most countries. Reaction time slows, judgment degrades, and the person experiencing it is often the last to realize how impaired they become, because sleep deprivation also damages your ability to accurately assess your own state. Push further, and the mind starts inventing things. Sleep-deprived hallucinations aren't like dreams. They intrude into waking perception. People report shadows moving in their peripheral vision, faces appearing on blank walls, sounds that aren't there. This isn't random malfunction. Researchers believe it happens because REM sleep, the sleep phase most associated with dreaming, doesn't just get delayed when you skip sleep. It starts leaking into consciousness. Brain scans of severely sleep-deprived people show REM-like activity intruding while they're technically awake, as if the brain is so desperate to dream that it stops waiting for permission, which raises an uncomfortable question. If REM sleep is forcing its way into your waking mind when you deprive yourself of it, what exactly is it doing there in the first place? And why does the brain fight so hard to get it? The honest answer is that neuroscientists still don't fully agree, but one of the most compelling explanations is that REM sleep isn't rest at all. It may be a simulation. Some researchers argue it's when the brain rehearses threats and emotional experiences in a low-stakes environment, essentially running survival simulations so the real experience feels less overwhelming when it eventually happens. Others point to its role in memory, particularly emotional memory, suggesting REM sleep is where the brain decides what to keep, what to file away, and what to let fade. Skip it entirely, and you're not just tired, you're accumulating unprocessed experience with nowhere for it to go, which may explain why chronic sleep deprivation is so tightly linked to anxiety and depression, not as a side effect, but potentially as a direct consequence. So return to the original question. What if you never slept again? Based on everything we actually know, from Randy Gardner's brain flickering into microsleep against his will, from rats that died of nothing specific except the absence of rest, from a genetic disease where insomnia itself is the cause of death, the answer is that your body would not let you skip it cleanly. It would take sleep from you anyway. In stolen seconds, in waking hallucinations, in a slow unraveling of the systems that keep you alive, because sleep was never the passive shutdown we imagine it to be. It's maintenance, it's cleaning, it's rehearsal, it's the only time your brain gets to take out its own trash. And there is, as far as we currently know, no substitute for it, no shortcut, no way to buy back the hours some other way. Every single night, your body insists on this one thing, and it turns out that insistence is not a suggestion. It's the terms and conditions of staying alive.